In 1967, the US Army abandoned a nuclear-powered city under Greenland's ice and decided that was fine. The plan was simple. Perpetual snowfall would bury it deeper every year, and the whole thing, the tunnels, the reactor waste, the diesel, the sewage, the classified documents, would be entombed forever. And the Army was right for about 50 years. Now NASA is photographing it from the air. A scientist in Vermont found a 400,000-year-old forest inside it, and scientists don't know if the ice tomb will hold, and nobody has a plan.
21 tunnels, nearly 2 miles of underground corridors carved into solid ice at minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit. At the center, a nuclear reactor, the first mobile nuclear reactor ever deployed on Earth, humming away 900 miles from the North Pole. Around it, a fully functioning military base. Up to 200 men lived here, ate hot meals here, 200 kilometers from the Greenland coast, buried beneath the Arctic ice sheet.
This was Camp Century. On January 22, 1961, Walter Cronkite aired a special report on it for CBS's documentary series, The 20th Century, City Under the Ice. National Geographic and the New York Times got access. The Army showed the world a marvel of American engineering, a polar research station, they called it, designed to study the Arctic and advance science. Most of it was a lie. The real purpose of Camp Century was a proof of concept for something called Project Iceworm, one of the most ambitious and terrifying weapons programs of the Cold War. The plan, build 4,000 kilometers of tunnels beneath the Greenland ice sheet, an area 3 times the size of Denmark. Inside those tunnels, deploy up to 600 nuclear missiles on mobile rail systems, capable of striking the Soviet Union with almost no warning. The ice sheet itself would serve as the perfect shield, invisible to radar, impervious to a first strike, hidden from every Soviet satellite in orbit. Dr. Robert Weiss served as the camp doctor in 1962 and 1963. He was 26 years old. Decades later, he told reporters, quote, "I did not know about any of the missiles or nuclear stuff, but we were told that they wanted to run a subway under the surface of the ice."
200 men lived inside a classified nuclear weapons platform. They played ping pong, attended Sunday services in a chapel carved from ice, and none of them had any idea what was going on. The Danish government, whose territory this was, had no idea. The population of Greenland had no idea. Weiss himself didn't learn the truth until the mid-1990s when documents were declassified. As it turns out, the ice didn't cooperate with the plan. Within just 3 years of construction, the tunnel ceilings began to drop. The Greenland ice sheet isn't a static frozen slab. It moves slowly and relentlessly under its own immense weight.
By mid-1962, the ceiling of the reactor room had dropped enough that engineers had to lift it 5 feet. They couldn't keep up. The glacier was alive and it was winning. By 1963, the Joint Chiefs had seen enough. The reactor was shut down that summer for what was officially planned maintenance, but it never restarted. The reactor was physically removed in the summer of 1964. The camp limped along on diesel power as a summer-only operation until 1966. Project Iceworm, the missile program, the whole thing had been built to test, was quietly abandoned. But when the Army left in 1967, almost everything else stayed. 9,200 tons of infrastructure left in place, 53,000 gallons of diesel fuel left in tanks that have almost certainly corroded, millions of gallons of sewage and biological wastewater left in unlined sumps cut directly into the ice.
PCBs, forever chemicals found to cause cancer and developmental damage in children, leftover radioactive coolant and materials, all of it abandoned on the stated assumption, which is written in Army records, that perpetual snowfall would entomb it forever. The ice closed over it. The US government considered the matter settled. But nobody thought to ask, what happens if the ice stops accumulating?
Now, the Army's problem wasn't just that they left. It's that nothing was connected. No unified record of what was there, what was leaking, what was failing. Different systems, different silos, no one talking to each other. Sound familiar? That's exactly the problem Odoo, the sponsor of today's video, was built to fix.
Odoo is an all-in-one business management platform that brings your CRM, accounting, inventory, sales, manufacturing, and more into a single integrated system, so nothing gets left behind and nothing falls through the cracks. The interface is clean, it's fast, and you only pay for the apps you actually need. Their AI-powered tools handle all the tedious stuff. Invoice capture with a 98% recognition rate, automatic purchase orders, predictive lead scoring, so your team can focus on the work that matters. And if you want to try it yourself, any single app is completely free, and there's a 14-day free trial, no credit card required. Our link is in the description. Okay, now back to Greenland, where a disturbing study is about to undermine the notion that Camp Century is going to disappear forever.
In 2016, climate scientist William Colgan published a study in Geophysical Research Letters that became one of the most cited Arctic environmental papers of the decade. The waste field at Camp Century covers 136 acres, buried about 36 meters beneath the current ice surface. When Colgan's team ran climate models against that site, they found that as early as 2090, under a high emissions scenario, the ice above Camp Century could tip from net accumulation to net melt. In that world, the waste doesn't stay buried, it starts moving.
Headlines around this went global. A radioactive Cold War time bomb surfacing inside the lifetime of children alive today. But then in 2021, Colgan's own team published a follow-up.
Using climate models corrected against actual weather measurements collected at the site since 2017, the new study found something different. Under every emission scenario, including the worst case, Camp Century stays buried. The debris field, currently about 32 meters down, will be 58 to 64 meters down by 2100. Meltwater, the new modeling found, would penetrate at most 1.1 meters into the ice over the next 80 years, nowhere near the waste.
Colgan himself said there is no risk the debris will come to the surface due to melting before the year 2100. All of this sounds like it should be the end of the story, but it isn't, because the 2021 study has a catch, actually a few of them.
It assumes snowfall at Camp Century will keep outpacing melt every year for the next 80 years. If it doesn't, the math falls apart. And the wider region around Camp Century is already changing in ways that complicate the picture. For decades, the surface there behaved as a giant freeze dryer. Snow fell, stayed dry, packed down, and never really melted. Now in summer, water from melting snow is starting to trickle down into the ice instead of just running off. And once that water finds its way down through the ice column, it can travel much farther and much faster than the older models predicted. The 2021 paper itself admits this. It notes that other reasonable ways of modeling how meltwater moves through ice would push that water as much as 5 times deeper than its own results show.
And there's another problem. Right now, more snow falls at Camp Century each year than melts. If that ever flips, even for a sustained stretch of summers, it doesn't flip back on any timescale that matters to humans. The ice above the camp starts thinning instead of thickening, and water starts reaching the waist. In that scenario, PCBs get carried in meltwater toward the Arctic Ocean, roughly 250 kilometers away. Diesel leaks from rusted out tanks, radioactive coolant works its way deeper into the ice. The 2090 headline did get walked back, but the debate isn't over and the waste itself didn't go anywhere.
And the legal dimension is equally unresolved. The US Army built Camp Century on Danish territory. Greenland, which sits atop all of it, is a self-governing territory that had no say in any of it and only learned the truth in 1997 when Denmark published declassified documents. Greenland's government has demanded cleanup and compensation, Denmark has agreed to conduct monitoring studies, but as NYU political scientist Jessica Green noted, international law is clear about preventing future hazardous waste, while being entirely ambiguous about liability for waste already discarded. No cleanup plan exists, no funding has been committed, no government has accepted legal responsibility, and nobody owns the mess.
Then in April 2024, something made all of this suddenly concretely visible, and it wasn't supposed to happen at all. A NASA Gulfstream 3 was flying a routine survey above the ice sheet using synthetic aperture radar to map the bedrock. Standard work, nothing unusual expected. But the radar showed something that had no business being there. A geometric grid, straight lines, right angles, a pattern the ice itself does not make, buried 100 feet below the surface in northwest Greenland, Camp Century materialized on the screen.
We were looking for the bed of ice, and out pops Camp Century, said JPL cyrospheric scientist Alex Gardner. We didn't know what it was at first. NASA scientist Chad Green described what they saw when they processed the data. Individual structures in the secret city are visible in a way they've never been seen before. Individual tunnels, in 3 dimensions, a city no one had looked at in 60 years, suddenly visible again.
The imaging was accidental, but scientists understood what it meant. The new radar data could refine projections of how deep the waste sits and how the ice above it is changing. The base is still there, intact and waiting.
But Camp Century wasn't only hiding the Army's waste, it was hiding something else, something that changes what we know about the ice itself. In 1966, Army scientists drilling Camp Century's ice core punched through the bottom of the glacier. 1,389 meters of ice, the first complete ice core ever drilled through an ice sheet. Then, almost on a whim, they kept going. The drill hit bedrock and pulled up roughly 11.5 feet of ancient frozen soil before a drill bearing burned out and they called it a day.
Nobody knew what to do with it. It wasn't the mission, it was basically just dirt. So they jarred it, labeled it Camp Century sub-ice, and put it in a freezer.
The sample traveled for decades, from Army storage to the State of University New York at Buffalo in the 1970s, then to a freezer at the Niels Bohr Institute in Copenhagen, where it sat in a corner, unlabeled in anyone's institutional memory. For more than 50 years, that jar of frozen dirt was never analyzed.
In 2017, during inventory for a new freezer, faculty curator Jorgen Petter Steffensen recognized that long-lost sample. And what scientists found inside would force them to reconsider everything they believed about the stability of the Greenland ice sheet. July 2019, a laboratory at the University of Vermont, glacial geomorphologist Andrew Christ is washing sediment from the core sample before analyzing it. He adds water, stirs the jar, and watches the rinse. Turns out small dark things are floating in it. He puts them under a microscope. Oh my God, he says, these are plants. Freeze-dried twigs, leaves, moss, so perfectly preserved, they looked, in Christ's words, like they died yesterday. When he added water to the sample, they actually unfurled.
The 2021 paper Christ and his colleagues published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences proved that Northwest Greenland had been ice-free and vegetated within the past million years. That was already a stunning finding, but 2 years later, in July 2023, the same team published a follow-up in the journal Science using luminescence dating and pinned the date precisely. 416,000 years ago, give or take 38,000 years. What those plants proved, Northwest Greenland, 75 miles inland from the coast, more than 800 miles from the North Pole, was bare ground less than 500,000 years ago. Moss grew there, possibly trees. The ice sheet we have spent decades treating as a permanent geological feature melted completely, and the conditions that caused it look a great deal like the conditions being created today. Atmospheric CO2 then was 280 parts per million. Today it's over 420.
University of Vermont geoscientist Paul Bierman, who co-led the research, called it the first bulletproof evidence that much of the Greenland ice sheet vanished when it got warm. Columbia climate geochemist Jorg Schaefer, another co-author, was even more direct in earlier interviews. It's not if Greenland is melting, but how fast. There is no question Greenland is an unstable ice sheet.
Climate models had long assumed the Greenland ice sheet required extreme sustained warming to destabilize significantly. The fossil plants rewrote that assumption. They showed that under conditions similar to what Earth is approaching, the ice sheet didn't thin at its edges, it disappeared. The melting at Camp Century alone during that ancient warm period raised global sea levels by an estimated 1.4 meters. If the entire Greenland ice sheet melted, it would add 7 meters, over 23 feet.
Bierman put the stakes like this. Greenland may seem far away, but it can quickly melt, pouring enough into the oceans that New York, Miami, Dhaka, pick your city, will go underwater. This is not a 20-generation problem. This is an urgent problem for the next 50 years.
And then the geopolitics caught up to all of it. After Colgan's 2016 study was published, Greenland's foreign minister demanded Denmark prepare to clean up the site and compensate Greenland residents. Monitoring programs were established, but no cleanup plan exists, no funding committed, no legal liability accepted by anyone. Into that vacuum, the United States government's renewed effort to acquire Greenland. Through his second term, President Trump refused to rule out military force to accomplish it. In a January 2025 poll, the overwhelming majority of Greenlanders said they did not want to become part of the United States. The same argument that drove Project Iceworm in 1959, that Greenland's geographic position between North America and Europe makes it strategically irreplaceable, is the argument being made in Washington today. The strategic logic hasn't changed in 66 years. What's changed is what we know is buried under the ice. And if the United States were to acquire Greenland, it would acquire Camp Century too. The tunnels, the diesel, the radioactive coolant, the PCBs, the 136-acre waste field. The liability literally comes with the territory.
The soldiers who built Camp Century were ordinary men doing extraordinary work in an impossible place. They carved a city out of a living glacier in temperatures that froze exposed skin in minutes. They ate hot food, they watched movies, they wrote letters home, and most of them had no idea what they were a part of. The army thought the ice was a vault, But while it was burying secrets, the ice was keeping a secret of its own. 11 feet of ancient soil that crossed an ocean twice, sat forgotten in a freezer for 50 years, and turned out to hold the most direct evidence ever recovered of when the Greenland ice sheet last melted. Turns out the archive and the time bomb are the same place. The same ice that preserved an ancient forest is holding back radioactive materials and forever chemicals. The current best models say the waste stays buried this century, the ancient plants say this ice sheet has melted before, and the warming required to do it again is closer than anyone is comfortable with. The Army was right for 50 years. The question is how much longer the ice keeps the deal.